Wil Malone is a composer, songwriter, and arranger. He's worked on such classics as The Who's Tommy, Journey to the Center of the Earth by Rick Wakeman, more modern acts such as Massive Attack, The Verve, Basement Jaxx, Peter Gabriel, Depeche Mode, Take That. The list truly is endless. Mr. Malone began his career in the 1960s psychedelic band Orange Bicycle, known for their hit Hyacinth Threads. After the band broke up, he released a really well-regarded but commercially unsuccessful album called Wil Malone. From the 1970s to the present day, his career was concentrated on his arranging and orchestration work, with the exception of the highly effective score to the film Deathline. For the uninitiated, the early 1970s was a particularly busy time in horror filmmaking in Britain. The two studios dominating the market were Hammer and Amicus, but there were many others such as British Tygon and American International Pictures who were releasing product at the time. AIP was the distributor for Deathline, which was directed by American filmmaker Gary Sherman and starred Donald Pleasence, Norman Rossington, Christopher Lee, Clive Swift, and David Ladd in one of his acting appearances before he became a production executive responsible for such films as The Serpent and the Rainbow and Get Shorty. It also features a uniquely moving performance in a completely horrific role as a hermetic cannibal played by Hugh Armstrong, the centerpiece of the film. One of the main reasons the film works is down to this performance, which many have described as one of the most moving put onto horror celluloid, and one that manages the impossible to find a way to generate sympathy for someone who is a cannibal. The film alternates between bleak and unsympathetic scenes of horror that take place beneath the London Underground, with excellent comedic scenes between veteran character actors Donald Pleasence and Norman Rossington, who are the policemen assigned to the case and are slowly putting together the pieces of what is actually happening. And features a score by the very young Wil Malone that takes a very different approach to that which we are used to hearing from the likes of James Bernard and Harry Robinson at the time. I'm a big fan of horror films of this period and have long been a fan of Deathline since I first was able to see it on VHS many years ago. I was extremely happy when the score was released for streaming and download recently and contacted Mr. Malone, who graciously consented to an interview about writing the music to this film, and I'm very happy to present this interview to you now.
First of all, this is the first film I'd ever worked on, ever.
Okay.
So I decided, rather than collect a series of little theme tunes to identify the people in the film, etc., I would do it in a sort of the way of improvising the music as I watched the film. So rather than the music making any sense in terms of music, in the sense of having a construction, the music just improvised as it went along. And I wanted the music, instead of being attractive as it is in most horror films, including Elizabeth Lutyens, I wanted it to be horror. In other words, as if the instruments were trapped in a sort of cycle of despair, if you like, or complaining, so that the music itself was actually horror. That was how I wrote the music, in that style. I had a very small lineup. I think I had about £400 for the budget for the musicians.
Oh, wow.
So I went down to the studio at Shepperton, I think it was. And firstly, coming from a rock and roll sort of scene and studios, the first thing that shocked me was the engineer was actually wearing a kilt. So as you can imagine, this is quite a culture clash. However, I mean, because being young and naive, I thought, well, how would a man wearing a kilt possibly be a studio engineer? Anyway, we got on with doing it, and I noticed that they told me well after the event that there's such a thing as a click track.
Right.
No, I had no idea that such a thing existed. Obviously, it would have made the job a lot easier, but I didn't know it existed. So I'm watching the film, and all I've got to guide me is the time clock running along the bottom of the film. So I had to kind of conduct to that, which was a very odd experience. However, we got through the day. About halfway through the day, the American producer came in. He listened to 2 minutes of the music and he said, "And you call this music?" and walked out. And I thought about it and thought, well, that's exactly the impression I wanted to give. I didn't want it to be music in the sense of something pleasurable to listen to.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
In fact, quite the opposite, which I think I achieved. And at the end of the session, on the way home, we called in at a pub, which was the haunting place of the ex-RAF pilots.
Oh, right.
Right now, I had hair right down to my shoulders, right?
Yeah.
So, again, another extreme culture clash, because every guy in this pub had a handlebar moustache, and they were all obviously ex-RAF pilots,
Right.
So, again, a totally different culture experience. But actually, they were very charming and very nice. They weren't, insulting at all. So that was cool. So that was my day. And as far as I can remember, it was cor anglais bassoon, violin, flute, drums, cello, and 2 female and 2 men vocalists.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah.
That was the lineup.
So how many days did you record the score?
1.
So it was one day, was it?
Yeah. And then I did the title music myself on the Moog synthesizer, and I played the drums on it as well.
Oh, did you? Oh, cool. I was going to ask about that, actually, because that's one of the things I think is quite attractive about the score, is that it's got that sort of chambery sound, similar to some of the tracks on your Wil Malone album, like February Face and things like that. But it also, then the Moog comes in. Then you've got the synth, and it actually does, I think, sort of contribute to that not beautiful sound you were talking about. Do you know what I mean? It's quite aggressive, harsh kind of tone comes in when it comes in.
Yeah, the thought behind the theme music was obviously to make it sleazy and like a strip club music,
Sure, yeah.
But I think there was a Doppler effect in it, which was meant to indicate trains passing by.
Yeah.
But that was about it. That was the end of my thinking on that.
Right. So did you do the arrangements, I guess you'd call it?
Yes.
You did them yourself as well?
Yeah, that's what I am predominantly, an arranger.
Yeah. Well, I suppose at the time you were releasing albums and you were doing arranging.
At the time, yes, because I was younger and the arrogance of youth, I suppose, which...
Well, I mean, people do sometimes talk about the idea that arranging and orchestration and composition is often just all the same thing, isn't it? The lines can get quite blurred sometimes.
Oh, absolutely, but it seems to me that if I'm arranging on somebody else's track, I at least have parameters within which I have to operate.
Sure.
Whereas if I'm writing music, there are no parameters, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. Do you think an arrangement and a film score or something are similar because they give you parameters?
No. For example, the music for Sicario, are you familiar with that?
Yeah, yes, I am.
Yeah, I think it's probably the most standout music I've heard for film for a long time, a downward progression of synths.
Right.
It is really beautiful, understated, minimalist, but perfect for the film, the look of the film.
As you said, it doesn't, you can tell, even though it's shot in London in the early 70s, and you've got Donald Pleasence, and you've got a little tiny bit of Christopher Lee there. So it's got all the sort of, hallmarks of a lot of actors and film that was being done at the time. It stands out because, a lot of the Hammer films and stuff, even if they were horror films, the scores were quite romantic in part.
Absolutely.
Were you inspired to go in any sort of particular direction? Because I know that after this, or sort of around the same time, you did.
No, I wasn't. I wasn't inspired to go in, apart from the decision, as I said earlier, to make the music more reflective of horror. than most films. But my sympathy lay, if there was any romance in it, my sympathy lay with the people who have been buried. In fact, the perpetrators of the horror.
Sure.
People who were actually eating people. So my sympathies kind of were with them as opposed to the hero and heroine.
That makes sense because
the only actor I remember was, of course, Donald Pleasence, who one always remembers.
Oh yeah, he's brilliant in it. He's great. Have you seen it recently, or has it been a while?
I haven't seen the film recently. No, actually, they re-released an album of the music.
Yes.
Excess. Do you have the album?
I do. Yes.
Oh, you do. Okay. So I was listening to it yesterday, trying to identify what I was thinking at the time.
Right. Yeah.
And some of it is just absolutely mind twisting. It really is.
Yeah, it's great. It's really, really effective. And another thing that's effective about it is nowadays it's really hard to sparsely score anything. You know, I write music as well, and things I get involved with. It is, you know, sometimes I get a note from someone who says like they want about 8 seconds of silence. Any more than that, and we're starting to get nervous. We need to put, you know, music behind everything.
Oh,
and it's really quite nice how sparsely it's scored. Some of the attacks and some of the violent scenes don't have a wall of sound behind them, and then other scenes have quite a bit. There's a really great shot. It's sort of all done in one shot of the actor's name's Cousins, when he's sort of like lying down there, and it pans in and around and then removes itself, and it's all scored, and it's just lovely.
Yeah.
And then
absolutely.
You'll get more silence, and it sort of makes you not understand what's next.
Yeah, that's kind of, to me, the attraction of film, is that ability to linger in ways that you wouldn't expect, if you see what I say.
Yeah.
As opposed to a stage play, which has to keep rolling.
That's true, yeah.
And obviously, a camera allows you to become far more intimate with the actors than a stage play.
I don't know if you're aware, but your Wil Malone album has been re-released from 1970.
Do you know, I noticed a funny thing in the newspaper. I think it was a couple of years ago now. The Sun listed the top most expensive albums you can buy.
Yeah, okay.
And in this list were the Stones and Led Zeppelin and everybody you've ever heard of. And so and my album was listed in there as well.
Yeah?
And it's worth, I don't know, a couple of grand or something.
Yeah.
But at the time, I think it sold, when it was released, I say it sold about 3 copies. And so I wouldn't have classed it as a big success, you know.
I think that's probably what makes it valuable.
Yes.
You know, that it probably wasn't in every single. You know how everybody bought a David Cassidy album, and then 2 years later, all the charity shops had David Cassidy albums of David Evans or whoever. But yours probably wasn't like that because they might have not made as many.
No, that's very true.
And then when people suddenly decide they like it, it's really hard to get. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it must have been just after that you worked on Journey to the Center of the Earth, I would imagine.
Oh, yes, with Rick Wakeman, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that was after doing Tommy.
Okay, yeah.
Because we did a double album of Tommy Symphony Orchestra with various guest stars. I've done quite a few albums with Symphony Orchestra, but that was when they had the budgets for that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Which they certainly do not now.
No, I don't suppose they do.
I mean, a lot of different writers contact me and they say to me, well, what was your influence? And I say to them, well, I had no influence. I just did what I liked, basically. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of strange when you're asked to compartmentalize what you do so that you can explain it. Because to me, it happens or it doesn't happen. There doesn't seem to be much I can pinpoint as an influence.
Absolutely. That was the thing I thought about it as well. It didn't strike me like I could say, oh, it clearly sounds like this or it sounds like that, or you'd been listening to a lot of Bernard Herrmann or whatever. Like there wasn't anything in there. It is this unique thing. Saying obviously you didn't get a film where someone sat down and they temped it with a whole bunch of music and said, make it sound like this, which is really freeing.
No. I didn't know what the hell was going on. I was, just thrown in at the deep end, as it were.
Yeah. So I presume it was an enjoyable experience then?
Enjoyable. Probably because I was young enough not to care, if you know what I mean. Oh, well, sure, this is just another day in the wonderful life of rock and roll.
Yeah.
You just take it as it comes at that age, don't you?
Yeah.
You don't start thinking about your future career prospects or anything. The very thought is very amusing.
Yeah.
Sincere thanks to Mr. Wil Malone for his time and memories in making this episode possible. If you've enjoyed this podcast, I highly recommend the score to the film Deathline by Wil Malone, available in digital formats everywhere. You've been listening to Storytime. Please subscribe on YouTube and like us on Facebook to get more content just like this. And please stay tuned for the next installment of Storytime, an appreciation of the music of Jurassic Park and The Lost World by John Williams.